Hello, my pleasure seekers, and welcome so much to today's episode. I have the beautiful Katarina, who is a high performance relationship coach, and I'm very excited to delve in to today's conversation. I feel like so many of you are going to relate to the beautiful wisdom and experience that she's going to share. So, Katarina, thank you so much for joining me all the way from Ibiza today.
A hard place to join from. Now, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, I guess for anyone naturally listening at the moment, they'd be like, how on earth do you get into this space? Like, what drove you to be like, okay, this is where I need to be, this is what I want to help, and this is what I want to do?
Yeah, and that's such a good question because now when I look at it, I'm like, I have the clear trajectory. I know how it all happened. But obviously, when I was doing life, I had no idea I'd end up here. Even like, I think 4 years ago, if someone had told me I'd end up here, I would have thought that they are bananas. But when I kind of break it down, there's kind of like three main prongs to it. Professionally, I did my first coaching qualification when I was 17. My dad is a coach. And he's always been really big in personal development, kind of throwing me deep into that world. So I've really grown up in that space. And I was an entrepreneur early in my career in the champagne and wine trade. But after living in Dubai, which is where I went to after that, I decided to pivot and moved into the behavioral science world. So in behavioral science, I really fell in love with psychology and human development and driving change and transformation. And that kind of led me into the coaching space. And then from an academic point of view, when I look at my entire academic career, I've really studied love, like love and gender dynamics. So honestly, from being like 14 years old, I remember my favorite book, still one of my favorite books, or rather texts. It's like What We Talk About When We Talk About Love by Raymond Carver. And then I studied Written on the Body by Jeanette Winterson, and always diving into the theory and kind of the ideas around love. And then for my master's degree, I did gender dynamics. So I studied masculinity and femininity and like the dynamics between the two and kind of where society goes wrong and how it entraps us actually in all of this. And that really feeds into a lot of my work. And then finally, on a kind of personal level, I have always been a nerd listening to the podcasts and reading the books about love. And I thought, as someone who's coming from a personal development background, that it would all work out for me, right? Like in my 20s, I was out there dating, living my best life, traveling, living around the world. And then when I got to 28, I was like, I'm ready. I'm ready to settle down. I'm ready to like meet the guy. And I did. I met someone on Bumble and, ticked all my boxes, and we ended up progressing and getting engaged, and everything was like picture perfect. But it wasn't the right person for me. And in the end, I ended up calling off that engagement. And that was probably I think it actually was like the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, because it's almost like everything that I thought and I knew crumbled, like it imploded from within, right? Like this kind of life trajectory that I had for myself of timelines and the kind of relationship I'd have and the kind of marriage and blah, blah, blah. And that all imploded. And then I was kind of back to ground zero at 32. And that was terrifying. And so that's when I kind of realized love isn't something that we can take for granted. It's not something that easy just because I'm a nerd and I love this stuff. And I don't come from a particularly traumatizing background or anything. Like, I'm an immigrant, but I've had a fairly privileged life. And that's what got me to study this topic and really dive into it and try to understand, where is it that people who are high achievers, people who are successful in every other arena of their lives, actually don't always get this part right. And in the process of studying all of that, I kind of accidentally created my now methodology, met my husband. And yeah, it was like later down the line, after I became an executive coach, that I started realizing that I don't think I love executive coaching. Like it's a little bit too dry for me. And actually, when I was drilling down into the different problems that the executives and founders that I was coaching had, I kept running into relationship stuff, whether they were single or unhappily married or in an unhappy relationship. It was always relationship stuff that was driving their anxiety, their loneliness, their frustration. And yeah, I put everything together and was like, I think I need to pull my finger out and become a relationship coach. And so I did.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Do you know what? It is so brave to make that decision at that age, because I also think, like, from a British perspective as well, I think we're particularly conditioned to be married, kids, picket fence by the age of 29, 30. I
Yeah.
made a similar decision at 27. And did you find that you triggered quite, people with that choice that you made? Because that's such a brave, we're so conditioned as women, like clocks ticking, family, and like
Sure,
the
for sure.
settling, right? When you knew in the long run, well, for me anyway, I knew in the long run, they're like, it's going to end in disaster for me. Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah,
going to be in a divorce in 4 years. Like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not worth it. Yeah. How
Isn't
do
that
people?
wild? I had the same thought. I had the same thought. I was like, I think we're going to end up divorced in 5 years.
Yeah,
Do I
I
go ahead
remember.
with
Yeah, totally. I remember the moment where I was like, I can't be with you anymore. And I remember thinking it's going to be either really expensive and there's going to be some children involved, or I leave now.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
actually I went to Dubai as well, but I didn't move there.
Oh,
But how did you find people reacted, and how did you remain certain in your decision, if you don't mind sharing that piece as
mm,
well?
that that's such a good question because I think it's something that I'm still kind of living the
Mm,
repercussions of now. A lot of my family and a lot of my friends and peers. I mean, obviously, I lost a lot of friends because a lot of my friends were his friends. Um,
yeah.
a lot of my friends are very supportive. There was definitely a kind of a gasp of, oh wow, okay, she's like exiting this. She's making a stand for something, and I do wonder to what extent there was a question of like, is she a commitment phobe? Is like, what's wrong
Oh,
with her? I mean, I ended up marrying my husband within like 9 months of meeting him. Right? It was
oh,
very fast. Yeah, which is also hilarious because that really tells me that once you've done that inner work, and I did
mm,
the inner work within 11 months, and I didn't even know I was doing the inner work. My clients now go through it within 3 to 6 months, but once you've done that inner work and you've healed all of those core wounds, it can happen so quickly, so
mm,
quickly. And so I think what I experienced was this kind of gasp of like, what's she doing? She's going against the grain. And people who are unhappy in their relationships and are still in those relationships have definitely distanced themselves from me, which I can understand. And it's something I was actually talking about last weekend at the retreat in Lisbon with a load of other female entrepreneurs about how as you step into your own authenticity, step into your own truth, you essentially up level who you are, right? Like you're becoming more honest. And as you
yeah.
become more honest, you become more powerful because honesty and authenticity are some of the most powerful things that you can be doing.
Mm.
And you are going to lose friends, you are going to lose people because people don't like that necessarily. It shows them where they're not being honest and authentic themselves. And that's quite painful for a lot of people. So shedding friends and shedding people isn't a bad thing at all.
That's such a good point. And, I think people will listen to this and think, "Oh, thank God," because I feel particularly as women, we're conditioned to be the yes person, the people
Mm,
pleaser, stick with your friends that you were brought up from day one of birth, and all these things. And it's just such, you lose a lot, like you said, you lose
absolutely.
things that you just didn't expect you'd lose. But it's such a brave
Absolutely.
thing. And then like, amazing, you met your husband in 9 months. Like,
Yeah.
love this. Do you mind sharing like what
Yeah.
the process looked like,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
So
how you
it
got
was
here?
11
Oh,
months. It was 11 months that I met him.
right.
Um, I actually talk about this a lot in my to my clients, like because really it was how I built my system, my methodology. So after I called off that engagement, a couple of things happened. I was living in Vancouver at the time, and I was very lucky that plant medicine was legal over there. It is legal over there. So I was doing a lot of that. And I trained to become a mindfulness teacher. So because again, I worked with this behavioral science company, they didn't mind me taking time off to train. And so I ended up doing like a month of deep dive meditation introspection. And that's when I kind of began to formulate this idea of like, here is where I think I went wrong.
Mm,
And that is now essentially phase one of my program, which is kind of taking stock of the patterns and doing a bit of an audit of, okay, what is the common denominator across all of my dating and relationships, including this engagement? Because the common denominator is me. So, what are the patterns that I'm seeing? And I spent some time really reflecting on that and kind of getting really clear and honest with myself about where I think I did go wrong, where I did hold back. And I recognized some patterns within myself where I had been lying to myself. Again, I think a lot of us lie to ourselves.
mhm,
And that was really painful and terrifying to see. But once I kind of accepted that and was like, okay, so clearly I did self-abandon in these areas. I then made a commitment to myself that I wouldn't do that anymore. And I began to work on looking at where is that self-abandonment coming from? Why was I doing these behaviors? Where was that all stemming from? And began to kind of solve for that. And after I started solving for that, I started actually going out there and dating again, kind of my little rebound phase. And as I was rebounding, I started to get really clear on like, okay,
Mm,
let's be really honest here again. Like, I'm going to be really radically honest with myself. Like, are these people that I'm dating, are they actually what I need? Not what I want, right? What I like, and it was hilarious because I was meeting these incredible men who were like everything that I wanted, right? Like, they, again, ticked all the boxes. They were handsome. They had all this money, status, blah, 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 blah. But when
mm,
I really boiled down to like, how do I feel with them? How does my nervous system feel with them? Like, and not in a kind of panicky or I'm unsafe way, but just like, is my gut telling me that there's something off here? Right? Like, actually listen to that deeper inner voice. Because we can't often trust that ego voice. The ego voice might be freaking out with the right person. So I began to kind of attune to, how do I feel? What is it that I actually need in this dynamic? And how likely am I to get that? And how likely am I to get that with myself if I stay with this person? And I began to start meeting my own needs more. And again, really, this is like phase 2 of my program. But I started to kind of look at as well, like, based on who I am as a high achieving, go getting, pretty ambitious female, what kind of a man do I actually need to
mm,
work with me in the future? Like, honestly, it probably wouldn't be some like multi-millionaire, hardcore, successful entrepreneur who's going to get threatened by me, because I've been there, done that, and it didn't work, right? Like that kind of competitive edge, it didn't work. And so I started to get really clear on that. And then this kind of magical thing happened where I'd moved back to London and I was still out there rebounding. And I was just like, I'm not meeting anyone that I like, but I was getting more and more clear on what it is that I need. And I'd been working so hard on clearing out all of my patterns, all of my blocks. And I was getting clearer and clearer and clearer. And I felt lighter and lighter and lighter. And I
mm.
felt so much more clarity on what it is that I need to be happy. And I also, at this point, kind of began to let go of ever meeting that. Like, I honestly began to let go of this idea that I'm ever going to meet anyone who actually meets my needs, quote unquote, and just kind of leaned into this idea of like, well, I feel very free from my past. I'd like grieved and processed all of the pain of that previous engagement. I'd like reprogrammed a lot of my belief systems and my core wounds. I'd really moved through those. And I knew exactly what it is that I need. And so I was like, I'm just going to start giving it to myself. And I started building out strategies for myself, being a corporate thinker, like strategies for
Yes.
myself on how I can like live my best life. And
Yes.
what does that even look like? Right. And if I'm
Mm,
going to be radically honest with myself, and if I'm going to just accept that maybe there's no one out there for me, and that's okay because I've got one precious life and I'm going to live it to the best way that I can and meet my own needs and make sure that I am happy and fulfilled and be super honest with myself and keep clearing that past. So I made this kind of plan for myself. And I remember I had like a really euphoric weekend. I came to Ibiza actually. It was the weekend that I was meant to be getting married to my ex-fiance. And I came here and I remember having this like epiphany that I was like, I'm going to quit corporate and I'm going to
yeah.
just like start, training as a coach because I worked for a coaching company and I want to help people. I didn't really know what in, but I was like, I know I want to help people and I know I want to do something more with my life and I'm probably going to take a sabbatical. And then I went to Slovakia where I was born and I spent a weekend just hiking the mountains on my own. And honestly, it was I was like euphoric. I was like, I love this new life that I'm building for myself. I'm going to I was like a kid in a candy shop. And then it was like the next weekend, I think 4 days later or so, I met my husband at a music festival that I had chosen to go to alone as part of
Mm,
my I'm living my best life. I
yeah.
decided to go to this music festival alone. I'd never gone to a music festival on my own. And I remember I was like on the train, on the tube in London, going to this festival, like an hour away from where I lived. And I was drinking like, I think I was drinking like a rum and coke or something, or like vodka
On
and
your
coke from like a plastic bottle. Classy bird.
class, yeah.
Or maybe it was a cat. I don't remember, but it was something that I was like
That's
trying to
okay. It
hide,
was a cat. Now,
trying to hide in the bag. And I was really hungover because I'd gone the day before. I hadn't met anyone the day before. And yeah, so the next day I was like, I don't really want to go, but I said I'd go and I paid for the ticket, so I'm going to go. And I was just like pre-drinking on my own at like midday. And then I remember I got there and I was like, okay, I'm a little bit like, a little bit, yeah, feeling good. And I was dancing around and yeah, I was just on the dance floor, like by the stage, like doing my little rave dance. and he tapped me on the shoulder. And I remember I turned around and I looked at him and I couldn't see him because I was partly inebriated, but also he had his sunglasses on. And I say it was dark. He tells me that it was like 4 p.m. in the afternoon and it wasn't dark. I'm
Oh,
convinced it was dark.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, and then he said hi. And I remember I just felt like body language and I felt the energy of a very safe person. And I heard his accent, and then he told me that he was from Canada. And I had just lived in Canada for 5 years, and I was really homesick for Canada. So when I heard he was Canadian, I like
Wow.
literally threw my arms around him, gave him a big hug, and was like, "Wow, you're from Canada! Like, I just lived in Canada." He was very startled. He was like, "Who the hell is this woman who's thrown herself at me?" And then yeah, like he didn't run away. He just kind of stayed, and I stayed, and then we danced together. We didn't really talk very much, but we exchanged numbers, and we were texting all night. And then he came over to teach me how to DJ. He did not teach me how to DJ. Like a few years later,
Smooth.
and um, and yeah, we had like a couple of dates. And honestly, I remember by like date 3, because our dates were really, they weren't intense in the sense of like they weren't big and dramatic. They were very simple, which I tell all my clients. I'm like, keep the dates simple. You don't want to have endorphins. You don't want to be distracted by all these like dopamine hits of going out and going rock climbing or whatever is trendy
Yeah,
these days. Just
yeah,
keep it
no.
freaking simple. Like
Just go for
he
a
came over.
walk.
Absolutely. He came over, and I would normally would never allow like a random man into my house. But again, he felt safe. And we drank some wine, and I think we ate like a lump of cheese and some grapes. And we just talked. We just talked, and we went really deep. And again, I felt so safe to share. I felt so safe to share like about the engagement and about like my journey, and he shared his journey, and we went into the vulnerable spaces. And I think also because I was in this space where I just didn't care. I was very detached. I was very detached. I knew this guy was visiting from Canada, so I was extra detached. So I was like, give a crap. Like if I don't see him again, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it was very, again, it was exactly what I talk about in phase 3 of my program. I was very surrendered to the outcome. I was so confident and clear in who I am that I didn't hold anything back. And by date 3, he honestly knew pretty much all my vulnerabilities. Like I'd gone deep. I think I knew most of his. I think he'd felt a little bit startled because I was being very radically honest with him. But by date 3, I mean, he kind of got a bit of a feeling of this is something really special. And I was calling my friends telling me, holy cow, I think I've met the man I'm going to marry or someone like him. Because obviously he was going to go back to Canada. I didn't know if it was going to work. He did go back to Canada, but then we never stopped talking. We messaged every day. Then I came to visit him. And yeah, within 6 months, we were engaged. And we got married soon after. And yeah, like never looked back. And what I wanted to kind of say with that is like all of that, when I look back at it, I can see very clearly the different phases I went through. And now I've refined them and obviously built them into a scientific methodology. And it works. Like the beauty of this thing is that it works. There is a formula to it. It's not rocket science. I think if you talk to, a psychologist helped me build out the program. But if you talk to a psychologist or a therapist, they're going to look at it and be like, yeah, this is common sense. It's
Mm.
common sense. The problem is that very often we don't find common sense solutions out there. And very often, unfortunately, a lot of it is really watered down and it doesn't go deep because, and this is where I get a little bit, not conspiracy theorist, but like I think a lot of the solutions out there don't want us to figure it out because then they would lose our business. It's the same way like dating apps ultimately
Yeah,
don't want you to meet someone, right? Because then
totally.
you go off the app. And
Hmm.
there is something about that when I think about, a lot of the other therapists or coaches, whatever, it doesn't work if you figure it out and they stop, like they lose their business. And so I
Mm.
really wanted to solve that and be like, but that's kind of crap. Like, honestly, I spent so much money figuring this all out. And I'm very lucky that I was on a 6-figure corporate salary with my
Mm.
dad as a coach, working for a behavioral science company with free coaching. Like, I'm so lucky.
Amazing.
And not everyone has that. And so that's what really made me think like, I want to have this end-to-end comprehensive solution so you can do it and be done with it, meet
Mm.
someone, build that relationship and like move on with your life with that person, right? Like you
Mm.
shouldn't have to be doing therapy for 15 years or
No way.
which is what I
That's
did. Yeah,
I also say I did a lot of therapy for 6 years, but that's part of, I think, like going through that journey and realizing this isn't working. Like
absolutely.
I'm seeing you again and we're 15 years in. Like this
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
normal. It's just
yeah,
codependency 101.
absolutely. And
And
it feels nice. It feels
of
nice
course
every
it
time.
does. That's why you
It
go
doesn't
back.
feel- Yeah,
It's a dopamine hit. Um, and then so when you were like dating him and like in the early days, how was your you said obviously you met him and you gave a big hug. You're like, oh my God, you're Canadian. I can totally relate to that. I've done that with a guy recently where you just
yeah.
almost intuitively know, and then you realize afterwards, like, oh, I don't know why I did that. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah, just give me a ring.
yeah, but you just kind of own it. You're like, okay, whatever. What was your nervous system okay throughout the whole early stages? I mean, you said you worked for a lot, but were there any little
Mm. Oh,
older
yeah.
habits coming up or self-abandonment like you mentioned or the avoidant things? And yeah.
That's an amazing question because you know what I've been talking about nervous system stuff all morning actually because
Great.
I got this flu after going to this retreat, and I think my own nervous system is like flaring up with business stuff, right? Because this is my second rodeo at being an entrepreneur. And first, when I was an entrepreneur, had a co-founder, so yeah, very interesting. I will say with the relationship stuff, I'm sure it did flare up. I
Mm,
think the reason it wasn't like prohibitive when it flared up is because I had all of these different tools and techniques up my sleeve that I'd mastered to help bring me back down very, very quickly. Like I didn't take it seriously. And definitely there was, I can honestly count on my hand, there were like 2 days in our entire relationship when I felt anxious. And I was a former anxious attachment. 2 days when I felt anxious. But again, because I had the tools of communication, of regulating my maladaptive behaviors, of being
mm,
able to, again, put a boundary in place and communicate and all of these things, it was all resolved within like 12 hours. And 12 hours because I was in Atlanta at the time and he was in Toronto. So we had a bit of a long distance thing to figure out there. Um, and then, yeah, I don't remember when the second time was, but I remember thinking like, this is the second time I felt anxious. But definitely, I'm sure it did flare up. It just doesn't feel like something even worth remembering because I was able to intervene so quickly. Um, I can't speak for him, like, because I know that he had a very different journey. And I think for him, it did flare up at certain times. But I think because I was able to be honest, be authentic, kind of support his own nervous system, my understanding is that he moved through his very quickly as well.
wow. And did when you like met him, so he was obviously an available man. Did you find on this journey that you there was a real obvious shift in the men that you attracted where you were like,
Mm.
this is starting to work? Was there a confirmation or were you like, oh, Barry, I don't know, like a making up name, he's getting a bit better? Or was it a really obvious, wow, this is a whole caliber of, me and my girlfriends call it conscious cocks, but like
Mm.
caliber of like
Love
a
it.
different kind of version of a man.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, spot on. And the really cool thing, and again, I bang on about this so much, and probably not enough to be honest, I should bang on about it more, but it was like
Hang on about it more. Whatever it is.
one of the things that I fell into, one of the traps I fell into, and I see so many high achievers that I work with fall into this. I knew exactly what I wanted, right? As a high achiever, we're really good at being like, I want this and I want that, and I'm going to aim for this and aspire to this and 7 figures and blah, 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 blah. And you have like a
Yeah.
little checklist and you jump through all the hoops like a show pony. I was always a show pony. And
Like,
I knew what I wanted in a
mm,
man. And when I was out there dating, there was a really interesting period where I was meeting men like on Bumble, because that was my main mode when I was in London and Vancouver. I was meeting men who were everything that I wanted. Like they ticked all the boxes and they were handsome and they had everything. And I remember meeting them. And again, I'd feel like some kind of disconnect in my body of this feels a bit off. And I would
mm,
try initially to override and be like, maybe it's me, maybe I'm whatever. And I would try to override it, but it wouldn't last. I wouldn't be able to override it. And sooner rather than later, honestly, within like 2 to 4 days, I think one guy in the early stages of my process, I think he made it like 3 weeks, but sooner rather than later, I would feel that this is off. And what happened when I met Damien, my husband, is he wasn't anything of what I thought I wanted.
it's
Like,
always the way.
that's
Yes.
always the way, right? He
Yes.
wasn't what I wanted. Like, and it's honestly, hallelujah that I was like a little bit, loose when I met him because I'm sure I would have had more resistance had I like met him in a more kind of, I'm here to go out and date. I'm here to like, I'm on a dating app, whatever. I probably would have had more resistance if I'm honest. But because I went in there being like, I'm honestly just so relaxed and I'm so clear and I'm so confident, I'm so trusting of the process. And I don't know who this guy is, but he's got great energy and he's got a lovely smile and he seems very kind. So I'm going to entertain this. And as I got to know him, I remember being like, he's really like almost like so different to my checklist, but he felt so safe. And that's when I was like, he's exactly what I need. He's exactly what I need. And I knew that really early on, like literally within 2 days. And that's why I teach all of my clients, get really radically clear on your needs, which is phase 2 of my program. But you have to get clear on your needs only after you've cleared out all of
Mm.
the garbage and the baggage and the stuff that society, your parents, your childhood has conditioned you into thinking is what you want, right? Ultimately, you have to clear the blockers and the blind spots to know what your needs are. Because so often I meet clients who they're like, I know what my needs are. I've worked on my needs. And then I ask them, and I'm like, wanting a guy who's 6'3" is not a need, right?
Totally.
That's not a need. Or
Yeah.
like wanting a guy who's got like millions of dollars is not a need. Wanting
Mhm.
financial safety can be a need, but I'm pretty confident that's not actually the need. The need is deeper. And you just haven't gone deeper because you've got your own blocks. Because maybe you don't believe your needs are going to get met because your parents actually neglected you. And so you grew up with an anxious attachment or a fearful avoidant attachment, and you really don't believe that your needs are going to get met. So we have to clear all of that first. Like for me, I certainly didn't think that my needs were ever going to get met. I thought my needs meant that I was a burden. And I thought they were really irrational, right? Growing up, all irrational thoughts themselves.
Of
But I
course.
didn't know. And it was only once I started clearing them up that I was like, no, this need is valid. Like,
Mm.
it's totally valid. I'm okay to have this. Like, I'm absolutely okay to have this. And what I found with Damien is that he met and meets my needs. And that's been like the biggest game changer. But he's not what I thought I wanted.
This is going to mind blown so many women that write the list and the
Mm,
A players that check the box, probably in the loo on their dates, of like, he's not got this, he's not got that. So for anyone listening that's like, okay, this is happening, same like type of man or woman or whatever gender is coming in, what would you suggest them to actually start looking at the blocks? Because this is language that not everyone necessarily understands, like this might
mm,
be the first time. You and I are very blessed that we've come from a personal growth background, but some people this is very
yeah.
new. So what would you just like the first place they're recently single or they've moved out of a relationship where they're like, I need to break something, but I don't know what's going on.
Mm, really good question. And I think if I was going to start someone off, and I actually
Mm.
have a free guide to doing this. It's in my
Great.
like free Facebook community that I can also share.
Thank
It's
you.
completely free, just join. Um, they start with like doing an audit of the patterns that you're seeing with the people that you're dating and finding
Yes.
attractive. And my audit's quite thorough, and start really pulling out like who are the types of people I go for, what typically happens in relationship,
Mm.
and where do we break up? Where does the attraction form? Where does communication break down? And start kind of pulling apart the patterns that you see. And then if you want to start looking into the needs, I mean, there's a few steps in between, but if we were going to kind of hack the process, start getting clear on like, in those moments, honestly, what is it that you would need? And let yourself answer from the gut. Again, I'm kind of like accelerating the process. There is a more thorough way of doing this,
Yeah.
but just simply put, like, what is it that you need? So, for example, with me, if I look, kind of thinking from the top of my head, if I look back at my patterns, the patterns were often that I would date men who would get intimidated by me or who
Mm.
would start to kind of like squash me down a little bit on an unconscious level. I don't think they were trying to be malicious, but there'd be like either a competitive edge or they'd squash me down or there'd be this kind of like resentment that I'd feel from them. And so, what is it that I would need in that moment? If I was going to be really honest, I would need safety to be myself, which I now know is safety to feel seen, safety to actually relax and be able to lean into the fact that I am, a high achieving woman and I have a lot of like strong values around the impact I want to leave in the world and justice and blah 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 blah. And I think there is a power to that I would need to feel safe to lean into as opposed to staying small And I didn't know that back then, because back then, all I knew was that I'm like, this guy seems a bit pissed off with me. So how do I fix that? I'm going to just be really nice, be really sweet, put makeup on and make him dinner or whatever it would
Yeah.
be, right? Because I didn't know.
Surface levels. Yeah.
So just kind of start getting curious. And like the more of an audit that you can do on your dating and relationships, the more clear you can be on the patterns, the better your starting place. And honestly, this is like step one with anyone I work with, is to start getting really clear on this so that we can pick it apart and help you move through it.
Wow. Okay. This is amazing. I really think everyone's gonna listen to this and be like, where can I get hold of her? How can I work on her? But is there anything, so when did you get this was asking, when did you come to the point where you'd realize this is the process you'd created and then you started working with a psychologist or psychoanalyst?
Mm,
When were
yeah.
you like, oh, it's always right in front of us. Whatever we're doing is always right in front of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Were you like, I know what I'm supposed to be doing?
No, again, really good question. Honestly, it was my coach at the time. So I don't work with her anymore, but she is a trauma psychologist and she's very, very seasoned in the world of relationships and relational growth. She's also in marketing. And I was working with her for the marketing stuff. And I remember I came to her, and at the time, I was an executive coach working with founders, and my business just felt a little bit like stagnant. And
Mm,
honestly, I had a couple of clients that I really loved. And when I drilled down into why I love them, it's because we were talking about relationships. But I went to her and I was like, she knew my story. And one of the exercises she made me do actually was she made me tell her my story and go really in depth. And there was like an exercise where I had to write for like 40 pages of all the things that I'm really passionate about and what I can talk about and what I've studied and what I love and my values in the world. So she did an audit of my personality basically. And then she kind of came to me and she was like, you're a relationship coach, you just don't know it yet. And I was like, but how? Now I'm trained in the relational work, trained in integrated attachment theory, all the stuff that I already knew. But I was like, again, I'm an academic nerd, I want to get the credentials and I want to formalize my studies. So done all that now, but back then I was like, how can I possibly be a relationship coach, right? Like, yes, I'm married, and yes, I have a track record of getting engaged, sure. But like, I was like, this is still early days for me. I have not been married that long, and all this doubt. And then she was like, yes, but you've done the inner work, you've done the inner process, you've
mm,
helped other people. Because that was the other question we did. She's like, how many people have you helped get into a relationship? And I remember writing down, like, holy cow, it's quite a lot of people actually. So anyway, so she got this full audit, and then she did one exercise where she was like, walk me through the month by month process of what happened from the point that you called off your engagement to the point that you met your husband. Just write out what you were studying. Like, and it took me a few days because I had to really go back and even look through my WhatsApp messages, and I leave voice notes to my best friends. So I was like, re-listen to them. But go
mm,
back and get really clear on like, what were you doing? What were the practices? What were your day-to-day activities like? And so as I went back through that, then she kind of looked at it with me and helped me start compartmentalizing of like, okay, this is when you were doing this practice, this is when you were doing this practice, and then this, and then this. And then she helped me understand what was the psychology of what was going on for me. And that's when I broke it down into this process. And since then, I've refined it, obviously, because I began by testing it on a load of people in my network. So went to Oxford, a lot of Oxford academics in my network. Great people to test on because like they love to pick things apart. So I I coached for free initially. I was still doing my executive coaching, but I coached for free, and I took people through my program and really was getting the feedback. And people were having aha moments literally from the first session, and seeing big, big, big change. And that's when I was like, okay, this is like insane stuff because I'm getting to the root of the issue, and it's this end-to-end solution again where like there's a real chronological order to the progress that we're doing, and the impact is compounding on each other. It's not like we're doing a bit of inner child work. Sorry, I didn't mean to do the passive aggressive voice, but inner child work, but like, which I'm all for, but it's like it's not the be all and end all. It's not going to solve all your problems, right? Like inner child work fits into the system in a certain place. It has
mm,
its time and place, but it's not like the silver bullet. And so what I realized is with this system and the methodology and the way that it kind of built upon itself, that's where the impact was really getting made. And again, I was talking to the psychologist and I was testing it. And then I actually brought it to my own therapist and I was like, here's my methodology. What do you think? And got massive buy-in. And even on this retreat, actually, there's a trauma therapist woman that I was working with, and I kind of walked her through my progress. So I'm always looking to iterate. Can I simplify it? Can I make it faster? Can I get people through this journey? But I've recognized, I think, that at this point, some people want to have the really rich, full experience, like the full curriculum. That's kind of how I am. And some people want to do an accelerated version. So I kind of guide people with what's going to work for them. And I always do like a 90-minute onboarding call to ensure that we know what's going to work best for their personality type. That's a really long answer. I
Okay, this is
remember the
great.
original question. But yeah, it was an iterative process, basically.
Wow. And so I guess now, like for you then, what's kind of your key focus over helping people in this? Is this still your key area you're helping people in, or
Yeah,
what's kind
yeah.
of next for you? What are you doing? I imagine you're doing a lot of things, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that great question. So my goal is honestly to help as many people as I can with this, because I'm also recognized that the more people I can help, the more data points I can get and the better the system will be, right? So from a business perspective, right now my rates are pretty low because I'm like, I want to get more people through the door and again,
Mhm.
get more data points. I want to have like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that I take through the process, create these relationships, and then yeah, and then keep optimizing. And ultimately, my long-term vision is like, I won't do a PhD because I don't need to do a PhD. I would love to do a PhD, I think, on this. Probably completely pointless. But again, in order to do that, it's like I need thousands of data points, right? And
Mm.
so really, I've got two offerings. I've got the group program, which is much more cost effective. I would argue it's much more impactful, the group program, because I'm in group coaching myself right now and recognizing when you're in a peer group of like minded professionals, men and women, and you see just how common your own struggles and mindsets and blockers are, you see how quickly you can move through them and you start to evidence build that this isn't your destiny. Because when we do one on one work, we can often feel very alone and siloed and anxious and ashamed of our own journey. That's why I did a lot of one on one initially. And it was bananas to me how many incredible people felt alone. That's why I decided to do the group program because I was like, not only can I make it more cost effective and I can obviously build my curriculum and it's all accessible, but people stop feeling alone and you start to see, right, that there are like incredible people out there moving through the same journey. And then also, I mean, heck, at the end of it, it's a group of a load of people who have done the inner work. If you want to go and make connections, go and
Yeah,
make connections. I'm
you
not going to
could
stop.
you could be the
Just keep.
matchmaker in that group, you know? Like you could be attending 4 weddings next year.
Exactly.
Um, and also what I often find, and I don't know if you feel so, when you're in a group container, you're with the right people at the right time. Like the
Yeah.
synchronicities are kind of insane, and you're there to realize some of your limiting beliefs or what theirs are. And
Yes.
it's like
Exactly.
so you can't even put words to describe the synchronicities with a group
Exactly. Exactly,
container.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly it, right. Like someone can ask a question that you didn't even think about, but
Mm,
actually it's exactly what you needed to hear because you've got
yeah,
your own block around it. And because you have your own block, you didn't even know you had it. Whereas in
exactly.
one coaching, the
Yeah. And
onus
you're
is
like,
on you.
oh, I've been
Hmm.
going on this over my head for ages, and then that's what it is. Yes. Oh gosh, I could chat to you for hours.
I know.
Um, for
We can really get.
anyone that wants to work with you, or if you've got any kind of programs or masterclass at the moment that you're really passionate about, where can they find you, and how can they work with you?
Yeah, great question. So the masterclass, I'll probably send you the link to put
Sure.
into the show
Yeah,
notes.
yeah,
Yeah.
of
I
course.
do
Thank
have
you.
it's a 50-minute masterclass. For those of you who want to zoom through it, you can adjust the speed because I know not everyone's got 50 minutes. And it is jam packed. I basically walk through my methodology, the behavioral science of attraction. I explain how it works. And I also explain a lot of the common blockers that I see people with and why
Mhm.
those blockers need to go. So if you want to come and get kind of your mindset shifted, it's a really, really good use of your time. Plus, you learn the methodology, and I deep dive into two areas of that methodology. So super, super useful, and gives you kind of like an insight into what the program's like. And then if you want to find me on social media, it's simple. I'm either on LinkedIn, like I'm there every day, as a lot of my audience are, and
Great.
it's Katarina Polonsky with a Y. or on Instagram at Katarina Polonska with an A. That's the weird Eastern
Beautiful.
European thing.
Okay, wonderful. I'll put everything in the show notes
Amazing.
for people to reach out to you and to join that masterclass. I know I'm going to be listening to that masterclass for sure.
Awesome. Awesome. I'd
Um,
love you.
yeah, I will. I will definitely give you my feedback. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure to have you. And yeah, for anyone listening who wants to reach out to Katerina and myself, everything is in the show notes. And for now, thank you so much for listening. And Katerina, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Really love talking to you.
Oh, my pleasure. My absolute pleasure. Thank you.